The last thing he said before the link closed was a question, and I have spent 2 years deciding whether it was a real one. The secure room aboard the CNS Constancy was small, designed for 2 people, maybe 3. Vorak Prime Sethial's holographic projection filled it like weather. 2.7 meters of chitinous plating, copper-toned, the sensors reading calm. I did not believe the sensors. He had been looking at me for a long time without speaking. His sensory arrays moved across the room the same way they had moved across Ambassador Akaffer 11 days earlier, in a meeting that lasted 8 minutes and left her unsettled for reasons she could not name. I understood those reasons now. Being catalogued by something that old is not the same as being seen. It is closer to being filed. 58 human warships were holding position outside. 11 days, that was how long it had taken from a transit corridor on Vethara Commons Station to the sealed perimeter of a star system that would never open again. 11 days from 2 frightened children on a floor to a civilization being told, quietly and without apology, that it was done. He finally spoke. The translation matrix rendered it in the formal, unhurried cadence the Zherath used for everything, as if urgency had been engineered out of their language thousands of years ago. "You are very young as a species," he said. "You should not carry this kind of weight." "We did not choose the weight," I said. "We chose not to set it down." A pause. His plating did not shift. Copper still, the sensors insisting on calm. "You ended this," he said, "over children." "Stay close." What she said next, I've thought about it every day since. 11 days earlier, I had been sitting at a gray desk in Block 7 of Vethara Commons Station, clicking a stylus against a stack of trade documents, thinking about something I cannot now remember. That detail matters. I want you to understand that before any of this happened, I was thinking about something completely ordinary. Something so ordinary it didn't survive contact with what came next. I have tried many times to reconstruct it. A meal maybe, a message I needed to send. The kind of thought that fills the space between one task and the next, weightless and gone the moment anything real arrives. The stylus was a physical one. Old habit from my first posting 7 years back when the field stations still ran on backup analog systems and you kept a pen because the power cycled at unpredictable hours. Everything ran digital now. I kept the stylus anyway. I clicked it when I was processing something without noticing I was doing it, the way some people tap their feet or twist a ring. I was clicking it when the earpiece crackled. Prentice Adage said my name once. Just once, and something in the way he said it, the specific compression of those 2 syllables, like he was spending something he could not afford to spend, made me set the stylus down carefully, which is not what you do when someone gives you normal news and walk out of the room. I did not run, not yet. Running draws attention in a diplomatic corridor, and 7 years of this work had trained me to move through spaces in ways that did not disturb them. I moved quickly. Past the communications alcove, past the shared galley where one of the junior attaches was heating something that smelled of overcooked grain. I heard her call my name. I kept walking. I started running when I hit the transit junction. Vethara Commons Station was a galactic assembly hub, which meant it was neutral ground, which meant it was large enough to contain the concept of neutrality at scale. The central ring ran 5 kilometers across. The outer sections were divided into environmental blocks, each one calibrated to the atmospheric requirements of whatever species had purchased residency rights in that corridor. Block 7 was human standard temperature and gravity. It smelled faintly of recycled air and the particular kind of institutional cleanliness that is not clean so much as inoffensive. We had been aboard for 9 days, 17 of us. Our delegation included Ambassador Delia Akaffer, 4 security staff led by Adage, 8 support and communications personnel, and 3 family members who had been invited on what the Office of Interstellar Engagement was calling a goodwill tour. The idea had been to show the assembly that humanity traveled with its whole self, not just officials, not just uniforms, people. One of those people was Inez Adage, Prentice's younger sister. 10 years old, brown-haired, still wearing the same pair of worn canvas sneakers she had brought from home because she had told her brother they were lucky and he had not argued. She carried a sketchbook with a green cover and she used it constantly, filling page after page with careful drawings of every alien species she encountered in the station corridors. Each drawing had labels, little handwritten notes in her precise, small script. Copper plating stays still when nervous. 4 arms, moves fast, do not stare. Gill fringe glows when emotional, beautiful. She had spoken to me exactly once in those 9 days. On the first afternoon, she had walked up to me in the common area, completely unprompted, while I was reviewing scheduled documents and said, "Do you think they dream about us?" Before I could answer, she had spotted a Zherath technician moving through the far end of the corridor and walked toward it with her sketchbook already open. I had thought about that question more than once since. The Assembly had extended humanity's membership invitation 4 years earlier. We were young by any available measure. The Zherath, who were the founding species of the Assembly's original charter, had been traveling interstellar space for 11,000 years. The Velhari, the Assembly's most respected diplomatic species, had been members for 6,000. Even the Orathmene, who were considered a recent arrival by Assembly standards, had 8 years on us. We came in with gifts: agricultural models, medical research, cultural archives. Humanity had developed music as a primary cultural expression, which turned out to be unusual. At the first formal cultural showcase, 3 separate delegations had sat in complete silence for the duration of our presentation, sensors working, translation matrices processing, none of them producing a classification for what they were hearing. We thought that was a good sign. Ambassador Akafar had said to me on our 3rd night aboard, sitting in the galley with a synthesized bread roll that the station's food systems had produced in approximate response to her request, her silver hair loose for the first time since we had boarded. "Calvin Marin, I think we're going to be fine. I think they actually like us." The roll was not quite right. She was eating it anyway, with the specific contentment of someone who had been doing this long enough to stop requiring things to be exactly correct. "They find us interesting," I said, diplomatic language for agreement. "Interesting is enough," she smiled. "It's how it always starts." I had filed that away as one of those small moments that would probably mean something later. I was correct about that, though not in the way I expected. The Zherath delegation had arrived 2 days after us. I had read everything available about them before the trip. The reports were thorough and, I had thought at the time, sufficient. I understood now that they had been describing the shape of something without conveying its weight. Vorak Prime Sethial carried the translated designation that his own language rendered as the one who has always stood. 400 years of unbroken diplomatic tenure within the Assembly. The Zherath moved without sound regardless of speed, which the reports had noted as a biological characteristic, and which turned out in person to be something that required adjustment. The mind keeps expecting footsteps. The absence becomes its own kind of presence. Their plating shifted color according to state: deep copper for neutral, cold white silver for something the Matrix had never fully rendered into human language. The closest approximation most xenolinguists used was below consideration, which the reports had noted as a possible translation artifact and which turned out not to be. Akafar's scheduled meeting with Vorak Prime lasted 8 minutes. She told me afterward that his sensory arrays had tracked her continuously for all 8 of them, not with curiosity, with the deliberate attention of something cataloging an object it has not yet decided what to do with. "I don't like his eyes," she said. "He doesn't have eyes," I said, "not in the human sense." "I know," she said. "That's not what I meant." 2 more days on the station. Then we were scheduled to move on to the Delhari system for the real work. 2 days was manageable. We could manage 2 days. We managed 1. I was running when I reached Transit Junction 9, and I was still running when I turned into Passage Ring 11 Core, and I stopped when I saw Prentice Adage standing in the middle of the corridor, completely still. That was the wrong detail, not the Zherath, not the lighting, Adage. Prentice Adage was a former naval officer who had been doing security work for 7 years before he joined our detail. He was compact, precise, and in perpetual quiet motion, checking angles, reading rooms, repositioning without drawing attention to the repositioning. I had worked alongside him for 2 years, and I had never once seen him stand still without purpose. Stillness for him was a preparatory state, not a resting one. He was standing in the middle of a transit corridor with his arms at his sides, and he was not preparing for anything. 4 Zherath were behind him. Their plating was cycling through cold white silver, not static, cycling in the slow, rhythmic way a warning light pulses, below consideration. The Matrix rendering that had always seemed like a translation artifact suddenly did not. Between Adage and the Zherath on the floor were 2 children. Ren Ford was 8 years old, his sister Kala was 11. They were the children of Dr. Elaine Ford, our xenobiology specialist, and they had been on the station for the same 9 days we all had, spending most of their time with Anise in the common areas or accompanying their mother to the observation galleries that overlooked the central ring. Kala had picked up Anise's habit with sketchbooks. She had been carrying a green one, different shade from Anise's, since our 2nd day aboard. The sketchbook was on the floor. It had been opened with more force than paper tolerates. Pages were scattered across 6 meters of corridor, some folded under the boots of the Zherath standing nearest, one wedged under a wall panel, Kala's small handwritten labels face down against the floor. Ren and Kala were not seriously hurt. I registered that in the first second and held on to it because it was the thing I needed to be true, and it was true, and I was grateful for it in a way that did not have a clean edge. They were frightened. Kala had her arms around her brother and was looking at the Zherath with an expression I would describe as careful, the kind of careful that children arrive at when they understand that the wrong movement will make things worse. Adage turned to look at me when I arrived. His face was not blank from absence of feeling. That is the important distinction, and I want to get it right. It was blank because what he felt was too large and too precisely shaped to allow onto his face in a transit corridor with 4 Zerath still present, still cycling. He had done the math, and the math had told him that the most dangerous thing he could do in this moment was let any of it show. "Get the children to medical," he said very quietly. "Get Ambassador Okafor, start the emergency transmission." He said my name once more before I moved. It sounded like, "Please hold together long enough to do these 4 things." I moved. The station's own security report, followed 3 hours later, would use the word demonstration. The Zerath had observed 2 young members of a new species present in a transit zone and had used the encounter to communicate something about hierarchy, about the natural order of things as the Zerath understood them. Younger species, the report noted in its careful assembly standard phrasing, needed to understand their place. Ren and Calla Ford had simply been in the corridor. I got them to our medical officer, confirmed they were shaken and not injured, and then I went to find Ambassador Okafor. Watching her face change while I explained what had happened was one of the harder things I did that day. Okafor was a woman who processed bad news in real time, visibly, because she had decided years ago that pretending not to feel things in front of her staff was a form of dishonesty she could not maintain and did not want to. The color left her face in stages. First from her cheeks, then from around her eyes, then from her mouth, until she looked like someone who had set something down in a hurry and was not sure she would be able to pick it back up. "Are they all right?" she said. It was not phrased as a question. "Shaken, not hurt." She nodded once, then she straightened, and the color did not come back, but something else did, something that had nothing to do with color. "Start the transmission," she said. "I'll be there in 2 minutes." I recorded it myself. Every word precise, every fact stated without rhetorical weight, because rhetoric is what panic looks like when it is trying to look organized, and this was not panic. This was documentation. I stated what had occurred where at what time involving which individuals. I described Calla's sketchbook in the same register I would use to describe a piece of furniture. I described Adage's face without interpreting it. I sent it through our diplomatic channel to Earth's Office of Interstellar Engagement, and I did not sleep after that. None of us slept. Okafor sat in the communications room for an hour after the transmission went out, which was unusual. Okafor was not a sitting person. She moved through silences by instinct, turned quiet rooms into working ones, had built her entire career on the understanding that a conversation left to itself would collapse. Watching her sit without reaching for anything told me more about the weight of what had happened than any report could have. Adage did not leave the corridor junction for the first 6 hours. He stationed himself at the nearest intersection to Block 7 and did not speak to anyone except to redirect station security personnel who came to file their own reports. Later, much later, he would tell me that he had needed to be somewhere he could see 3 corridors at once, that he had needed the geometry of it. Inez sat with Ren and Calla in the medical bay. She brought her sketchbook. She drew pictures of constellations and passed them across the table without saying anything, and Calla took them and looked at them, and Ren fell asleep with one still in his hand. I know this because Elaine Ford told me later, and because I have thought about it many times since, and because I believe it was the bravest thing any of us did that night. A 10-year-old with a green-covered sketchbook sitting across from 2 frightened children, and deciding that the useful thing, the real thing, was to draw stars and pass them over without making it into more than it was. 11 hours. That was how long it took for Earth to respond. The response did not come through the diplomatic channel. It came through the military emergency frequency, which was a channel I had seen listed in our communications infrastructure documents and had registered as a formality. Every interstellar diplomatic operation maintained one. It was protocol. In 4 years of assembly membership, in 7 years of working in this office, I had never heard it used. It opened at 3:40 station time. A tone first, then a voice I did not recognize. Calm, not the performed calm of someone managing their reaction, the genuine calm of someone who had already passed through the part of this that required managing. The message was 11 sentences long. I counted them without meaning to. Human personnel on Vethara Commons Station and in all Zerath-adjacent space were to withdraw to designated safe coordinates within 48 hours. Our diplomatic credentials with the Galactic Assembly were being temporarily suspended. Earth was not filing a formal complaint. Earth was not requesting a tribunal. Earth was not initiating any standard grievance process. Earth had assessed the situation and reached a conclusion. The final sentence was the one that changed the quality of the air in the room. "What follows is not a grievance," it said. "It is a finding." I read it 3 times. Then I looked at Adage, who had come to stand in the doorway of the communications room sometime during the reading, and I watched the blankness leave his face. What replaced it was something quieter. Something that was not relief exactly, but that occupied the same space relief occupies. He looked like someone who had said a thing out loud and been told that yes, they had heard correctly, and yes, it was exactly as serious as they had understood it to be. He looked like someone who had been heard. We began packing within the hour. All 17 of us, moving through the human section of Vethara Commons with that particular focused efficiency that takes over when the part of your mind that manages uncertainty has finally been given something concrete to do. The corridors looked the same. The ambient light was the same neutral white the assembly used in shared spaces, calibrated to be inoffensive to as many visual systems as possible. Nothing visible had changed. Something had changed anyway, the way pressure changes before a storm, before there is anything to see. Inez walked beside me as I moved equipment to the transport bay. She was carrying her sketchbook. She had filled 11 more pages since the previous morning. "Are we going home?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "We're going home." She nodded once, the way children nod when they already knew the answer and just needed to hear it stated. Then she went back to her sketchbook and drew something I did not see until much later. Our transport cleared Vethara Commons docking range 6 hours and 14 minutes after Earth's message arrived. I watched the station shrink through the viewport until it was a point of reflected light among other points of reflected light, and then I could not tell it from any of them, and then it was gone. I opened the field journal the night we left Vethara Commons. It was a standard-issue diplomatic record, gray composite cover, no markings. I had carried it for 2 years without writing more than administrative notes. I opened it to the first blank page and I started writing, and I did not know yet that I would not stop for 140,000 words. I did not know it would become the record it became. I only knew that something had happened that needed to be written down, and I was the one who had seen it, and diplomats keep records. It was the only instinct I had left that still made sense. The transit to Waypoint Anchorage Ferris 7 was 9 hours. Akafer sat in the main cabin with her hands folded in her lap and looked at nothing in particular. Adage was in the forward compartment with his security team. I could hear the occasional sound of equipment being checked and rechecked, the small precise sounds of people who need their hands to be doing something they can control. Ren and Kala were with their mother in the rear compartment. Inez was asleep 2 seats away from me, her sketchbook tucked under one arm, her lucky sneakers still on her feet. She had drawn for 2 hours after we boarded and then fallen asleep with her pencil still loosely in her hand. I had taken it gently so it would not fall. And I sat there holding a child's pencil on a transport leaving alien space. And I understood that the specific weight of that object, small, worn down at the tip, the kind of pencil that gets replaced without ceremony when it runs out, was going to stay with me in a way that fleets and diplomatic consequences were not quite going to stay with me. The large things you can prepare for, or you can tell yourself you are preparing for them. The small things arrive without warning and stay. The military channel opened at hour 3. Adage came out of the forward compartment and sat beside me. For the first time since the corridor, he looked like himself. Present, calibrated, he had found his geometry again. "That's a fleet positioning signal," he said quietly. I looked at him. "How many ships?" He was quiet for a moment, studying something I could not read on his handset display. "I don't have the full count yet, but the identifier codes I'm seeing." He paused. "These aren't patrol vessels, Marin." The word finding had been clear. The phrasing had been unambiguous. But there is a distance between understanding a word and feeling its full weight, and that weight arrived in the cabin at hour 3 like something that had been waiting for permission to land. "They didn't just decide to respond," I said. "No," Adage said. He looked at me steadily. "They were already moving before we sent the transmission." That's it. "The 48-hour window wasn't for us," he said. "It was for everyone else to get clear." The fleet was already in motion before our transmission arrived. The 48 hours were not preparation time, they were notification time. There is a difference. Ferris 7 Anchorage was not supposed to look like anything. It was a resupply waypoint, a skeleton installation established 2 years earlier to support deep space exploration vessels moving through the outer assembly corridors. The kind of facility that appears on a star chart as a small notation and nothing more. When our transport dropped out of fold space into its approach corridor, I looked through the viewport expecting a modest structure and a handful of docked ships. 43 vessels were already holding position. More were arriving while I watched. They came out of fold space the way large things sometimes move when they have been doing something long enough to have removed all uncertainty from the process. No adjustment period, no circling. Each ship appeared at a specific point and took a specific position and stopped, with the particular settled quality of an object that has always been there and simply became visible. I pressed my hand against the cold of the viewport and I counted. I got to 43 and stopped counting because more were still coming. Adage was standing behind me. I heard him make a sound that was not a word. "How long have they been moving?" I asked. Before we sent the transmission, he said, before we sent it Marin. I understood abstractly what Earth's 11 sentences had meant, a finding, not a grievance. The phrasing had been clear. But there is a specific moment when an abstraction stops being understood and starts being felt, and that moment was watching a 44th ship arrive and orient and hold, already knowing where it was supposed to be. HFY came to stand beside me without speaking. We watched together for a while. I spent 20 years trying to prevent exactly this kind of response, she said finally. Her voice was even, not detached. Even the way things are even when they are carrying weight evenly and not putting any of it down. I know, I said. A pause, another ship arrived, 47. I'm not sure I want to prevent it anymore, she said. Neither of us said anything after that. We stood at the viewport and watched the fleet finish assembling, and I did not write anything down for a while. The journal stayed in my bag. Some things need to be witnessed before they can be recorded, and recording too quickly is a way of looking away. 58 ships in the end, I counted them all. We were transferred to the CNS Constancy within 3 hours of docking. She was a heavy carrier, the kind of ship that is designed to communicate something before you board her. The crew processed our arrival with quiet efficiency. Quarters, medical assessments, food in that order, because that is what soldiers do when they receive civilians in a crisis. They make them safe first and answer questions second. Admiral Saya Vance met with HFY and me together in a briefing room that smelled of cooling metal and sharp coffee. She was 59 years old, gray-cropped, originally from Nairobi, with the kind of posture that suggested she had long since stopped requiring chairs to be comfortable and now simply used them. She sat across from us with her hands flat on the table, and she did not apologize for what was coming. I noticed that immediately. She was not cold. She was honest in the specific way that honest people are honest when they have decided that softening a thing is a form of disrespect. I picked up the coffee cup beside me. It was empty. I set it back down. The threshold, she said, is a standing doctrine that has been in place since before humanity's first assembly contact. It has no formal classification name. It exists in internal military records under that single word. It was drafted by people who understood that the universe is large and that we would be meeting minds very different from our own, and that among those minds there would be some that operated within rules while holding a model of the world in which our children did not constitute a protected category. She paused, her hands did not move. The threshold states that any deliberate act of harm directed at human children by a foreign entity triggers a response that bypasses all diplomatic frameworks. Entirely, it does not root through the assembly grievance process. It does not require a vote. It does not wait for a tribunal to convene. A breath. It proceeds to permanent consequence. HFY said, not punishment. Not punishment, Vance confirmed. Punishment assumes the other party will learn and change their behavior. Consequence assumes the situation will simply no longer exist in its current form. The distinction is not semantic. It determines what you do next. The threshold had been in place for longer than humanity had been in space. Someone, somewhere, before we had ever spoken to another mind in the universe, had understood that hope was not a strategy. I wrote that down later. I wrote it down exactly like that. The Galactic Assembly registered our membership suspension 16 hours after we left Vethara Commons. What followed, as I learned from communications summaries over the next 2 days, was by all accounts immediate and comprehensive. 14 separate diplomatic channels attempted to reach Earth's government in the first 6 hours. The Velhari Assembly Council transmitted a formal appeal. The Orathmine, who had been assembly members for 8 years and had interacted with humans a total of 11 times, sent a message that took our linguist an afternoon to decode, and that turned out to be an expression of concern so carefully structured that 3 different translation matrices produced 3 different interpretations of whether it was addressed to Earth, to the Assembly, or to the concept of the situation in general. Earth responded to none of them. The total, unhurried silence from a species that was supposed to be young and manageable and still learning how these things worked, that was, I came to understand, what was frightening the rest of the Assembly. Not the fleet, the silence. Humanity was not calling emergency sessions. Humanity was not issuing counter-statements. Humanity was not doing any of the things a new species was supposed to do when it had a grievance. Humanity was moving, and humanity was quiet, and those two things together produced a quality of attention from the Assembly that no amount of diplomatic performance could have generated. 4 Velhari diplomatic carriers intercepted us before we reached Jerath territorial space. They were marked with the Assembly's neutrality insignia, a layered symbol that every species in the Assembly recognized, and their approach was measured and formal and precisely calibrated to communicate that this was not a hostile action but a request. Vance had the lead carrier hailed. The Velhari representative was First Accord Speaker Oron Vel, one of the senior diplomatic voices in the assembly. The Velhari were tall, soft-edged in biology, with bioluminescent gill fringes along the jaw and neck that brightened when they were experiencing strong feeling. Oron Vel's fringes were bright enough to be visible through the hail distortion. He spoke in the careful, word-by-word cadence that senior Velhari officials used when they were choosing each syllable deliberately. He asked Admiral Vance to stop. He said the assembly was convening an emergency tribunal. He said the incident on Vethara Commons was being formally reviewed and that humanity's grievance was legitimate and would be heard at the highest available level. He said all of this in a register that made clear he believed every word of it and that he believed it should be enough. Vance listened to all of it without interrupting. She was very still while he spoke, not the stillness I had seen in Adage at Passage Ring 11 Core, but something adjacent, settled. When Oron Vel finished, she said, "First Accord Speaker, we have significant respect for the Velhari people and for your role in this assembly. We are not moving against the assembly. We are not acting against any assembly member. We are taking a specific, bounded action against a specific party. We ask that your vessels move to a safe distance." He said, "You cannot simply." "We can," Vance said, not harshly, the word simply. As if the only relevant question had already been answered, and this conversation was a courtesy extended to the process of him arriving at the same conclusion. There was a long silence on the channel. Then Oron Vel said something that the translation matrix struggled with. Our xenolinguist, Lieutenant Yara Bast, told me afterward that what he had said carried a weight that did not translate into a single human emotional category. The closest approximation she could produce was something like, "The weight of what you are carrying is understood, and it frightens us." The 4 Velhari carriers moved aside. The Jerath fleet was waiting. 11,000 years of interstellar civilization produces considerable things, and one of the things it had produced was a fleet that communicated its own history just by existing. Their warships were enormous, refined across centuries into shapes that had solved every engineering problem so completely that they looked inevitable. They were positioned forward and aggressively, which Vance's tactical officers noted meant the Jerath were not preparing to defend their space. They were preparing to demonstrate that the cost of entry would be too high for a young species to afford. They had held that position for 11,000 years. No one had ever made them move. The engagement lasted 9 hours. I will not attempt a military account. I do not have the vocabulary for it, and the official record documents the tactical specifics in full. What I can tell you is what it looked and felt like from the bridge of the Constancy. Human ships moved in coordinated patterns I could not always follow, adapting faster than the Jerath responses could track. The Jerath had power built across millennia. Our fleet had something harder to quantify. Purpose, maybe, or something more precise than purpose. The certainty built into every movement that the outcome had already been established, and this was the process of making it true. Jerath ships were disabled where possible. Engines targeted, communications severed, weapons neutralized, crews left with functional life support and access to escape vessels, hulls intact. Vance had been clear in her orders. We were not there to eliminate the Jerath. We were there to remove their capacity to leave their own system and place themselves near anyone else's children again. There were losses on both sides. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not minimize them. I recorded every name I was given on both sides of the engagement in the field journal that was growing heavier every hour. People died, and the record should carry their weight even if I can only carry a portion of it. By the end of 9 hours, the Jerath military fleet was no longer a functioning force. On the 4th day of the colonial recall operation, during a quiet interval between engagements, a young bridge officer came to stand beside me at the observation window. His name was Eli. He was maybe 24. He had the look of someone who had been doing a job for long enough to be good at it and not quite long enough to have stopped being surprised that he was. He looked out at the stars for a while without speaking, just standing there, which was more conversation than he had offered any of the civilian observers in 4 days. Then he said, "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" I considered it genuinely, not as a performance of consideration. I turned it over, looked at what I actually thought. "I think we're doing the necessary thing," I said finally. "I'm not sure those are always the same. In this case, I think they are." He nodded slowly. "My little sister is 6, he said. He returned to his station. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say, and useful was the only category I had available. I stayed at the observation window for a few minutes after he left, looking at the dark where the engagement had been, and I thought, somewhere a 6-year-old is in school right now, drawing something, arguing about something, completely unaware that 58 warships are in the middle of a star system making a specific point on her behalf, and that one of the people making it is her brother, and that her brother wanted me to know she exists. I went back to my cabin and wrote it all down. 19 colonial installations, 3 star systems, 7 days. Each one received the same transmission: you are being recalled. Your colonial infrastructure will be dismantled. Vessels with interstellar capacity will be escorted to your home system and no further. You will not be harmed if you comply. 16 complied. 2 required additional engagement before complying. 1 resisted and was rendered compliant in a process that took 14 hours and left their colonial installation intact and their personnel unharmed, though no longer in possession of anything capable of leaving the system on its own. I watched all of it from the bridge or from the briefing rooms where Vance and her officers planned each step. I ate what was put in front of me. I slept in 4-hour intervals. I wrote continuously. Vorak Prime Sethial transmitted 14 messages over those 7 days. The first 12 were variations on a demand for negotiation. The 13th was an appeal to the Assembly to intervene. The 14th was different. It was brief. It stated plainly that he was requesting to speak with someone in authority. Vance read it and then looked at me across the briefing table. "I want you to take the conversation," she said. I did not want to do it. Not because I was afraid, though I was, because I was not certain I could sit across from him and maintain the composure the moment required. I was still carrying the image of Kala's sketchbook pages scattered across the corridor floor. I was carrying Ren's face, which was 8 years old and should never have been required to arrange itself the way it had arranged itself in that corridor. I was carrying all of it. But Vance had asked me to witness this from the beginning. Witnessing, I had learned, sometimes means doing the thing you most want someone else to do. I checked the field journal was closed. I straightened my jacket once. I sat down in the secure room and the holographic link initialized. He arrived at full scale, 2.7 meters of chitinous plating, copper-toned under the projection's rendering. The sensors read calm. I had decided somewhere over the past 11 days to stop believing the sensors. His arrays moved across the secure room the way they had moved across Akka for 8 minutes into a meeting on Vethara Commons Station. Cataloging, filing. I let him file me. I did not let it land on my face. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. "You are very young as a species," he said. "You should not carry this kind of weight." "We did not choose the weight," I said. "We chose not to set it down." A pause. "What you have done is without precedent in 11,000 years of assembly history." "Yes," I said, "we know." His plating did not shift. "Other species will calibrate their relationship with you differently now." "Some already had," I said. "They were simply too careful to say so directly." A longer silence. I counted seconds without meaning to. I reached 11 before he spoke again. The number did not escape me. "You ended this over children." "Yes. We did not consider them worth the architecture of a response." "I know what you considered them," I said. My voice stayed level. "The alternative was something I was not going to allow in that room, not because it would have been wrong, but because it would have changed what I was there to do. That is precisely the problem, and that is why this conversation is happening from orbit rather than from a table." He was quiet for a moment. His sensory arrays held very still, stiller than I had seen in any recording. Then he asked a question I had not expected, not because it was unexpected in content, but because of how it arrived, stripped of the formal cadence, almost plain. "Why are we still here?" He did not mean geographically. "Because this is not about what you deserve," I said. "It is about what we are, and what we are is not willing to go further than necessary. Your home system is sealed. Your capacity to leave it is removed. The children of every other species in this assembly and ours are safe from you now. That is enough." A pause. "That is exactly enough." His plating shifted, slowly moving through copper toward something the Matrix had no reading for. Not copper and not cold silver, something in between that neither color quite described. His arrays were still. He did not speak. He did not speak for a long time. Then the link closed. I sat alone in the secure room. I did not think about anything in particular. I was aware of the hum of the ship's systems, the specific quality of recycled air, the faint vibration through the deck plating that meant the engines were running. I sat with those things for a while. When I finally looked down, the field journal was open on the desk beside me, last entry mid-sentence, pencil resting across the page. I did not remember opening it. I did not remember picking up the pencil. I finished the sentence, then I kept writing. The return transit took 16 hours through fold space. Akafar sat in the main cabin with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the space in front of her, not at anything it contained. She was a woman who had built her career on her ability to reach into a quiet room and make it productive. Watching her sit in silence without reaching for it was the most accurate measure I had of what the past 11 days had cost. Adage was in the forward compartment with the remaining security detail, running equipment checks. The sounds were small and precise and had nowhere to go. Inez was asleep. She had drawn for 2 hours after we broke orbit and then fallen asleep with her sketchbook open, pencil still loosely held. I took the pencil gently. I held it for a while, thinking about nothing in particular, and then I put it on the fold-down table beside her and went back to my own seat. Earth's orbital station was busier than I had ever seen it on arrival. Human ships, many of them, but also unexpectedly assembly ships. Velhari diplomatic carriers, 3 Orathmine science transports which had no protocol reason to be present and were there anyway. The Orathmine had apparently decided as a species that they wanted to be near Earth right now. I filed that observation. It felt like something that would clarify later. The full assembly session convened 4 days after our return. I was given a place in the upper gallery. HFY entered the chamber with Dr. Fenris Bowen, the newly appointed senior representative, and I watched from above as every species in that chamber rose to their feet, not because protocol required it. I had confirmed beforehand with the Delhari liaison that the protocol said nothing about standing for a re-entering delegation. They stood because they chose to, all of them, Velhari delegates who had moved their carriers aside. Orathmine representatives who had been in the assembly 8 years and had met humans 11 times. A small delegation from a species whose name the translation matrix rendered as something between the quiet ones and those who arrived recently, and who had never interacted with a human at all before 6 weeks ago. They stood too. HFY walked to the podium. She spoke for 14 minutes. I had read the speech the night before and told her honestly that it was the best thing she had ever written. She had disagreed, characteristically, and changed 3 words. Listening to it in that chamber, I could not identify which 3. She said humanity had not returned to the assembly to be feared. She said fear was a reasonable response to what had happened, and she was not going to ask anyone in that room to stop feeling it if they felt it. She said what she was asking was something different, to understand. We did not do what we did to prove that we are powerful. We did it to prove that we are specific. Every being in this chamber who has ever stood between something smaller and something dangerous already understands what we did and why it required no deliberation. It requires only honesty. She paused. We are young, we will make errors in this assembly, and we will expect to be held accountable through proper means as we will hold others accountable through proper means. But there is one line, one single absolute line, and now every civilization in this galaxy knows exactly where it sits and exactly what crosses it. Another pause, not for effect. She was composing herself, and she was doing it in front of hundreds of beings, and she was not hiding that she was doing it. We rejoined this assembly because we believe in it. We believe in conversation and patience and the long, difficult labor of building understanding across minds that work differently from our own. We believe in all of it. She looked around the chamber. But we believe in our children first. We will always believe in our children first. She stepped back from the podium. 3 seconds of silence. Then the Velhari delegation began their harmonic response, the low collective tone their species produced in place of applause, and it spread the way sound spreads in large enclosed spaces, carrying into other registers, and the Orathmine added their own, and it moved across the chamber in the slow way that things move when a lot of different kinds of minds arrive at the same place at the same time. It was not human. It was 60 species grieving and recognizing and agreeing simultaneously, and it was one of the most extraordinary sounds I have ever heard, and I wrote it down, and I know the words cannot carry it, but I wrote it down anyway because the record should try. Prentice Adage left military service 9 months after Vethara Commons. He took a position with the Assembly's new Joint Learning Initiative, a program placing human educators on hub stations, building shared learning spaces for young members of all species. He sent me a message when he started. 1 line, figured this was a better use of what I know. Children learn faster than generals. Ambassador Delia HFY was appointed Assembly Child Welfare Liaison, a role created by unanimous Assembly vote, the first unanimous vote in that particular category in Assembly history. She negotiated the charter herself. The clause she insisted on, the one that took 4 months of negotiation, and that she would have spent 40 years on if necessary, gave the role binding authority. The liaison finding could trigger protective action without requiring full Assembly approval. She told me later that she thought it was the most important 4 months of her career. Inez Adage spent 3 years writing a book. She was 13 when it was published, the youngest author in the Assembly Translation Network's recorded history. It was not about the incident. It was not about the fleet or the threshold or anything that happened in the 11 days between Vethara Commons and the sealed star system. It was a collection of written portraits, detailed sketches of every alien she had encountered during the Goodwill Tour, built from the notes in her green-covered sketchbook. She called it Every Face I Saw Out There. It was translated into 51 languages. In an interview, she said she wanted people to know that the galaxy was full of interesting faces and that she had been very lucky to see so many of them. I asked her about the drawing months later when she was visiting the Constancy during a refitting stay. The drawing she had made when we left Vethara Commons. Earth, small and bright, with 3 words underneath that I had not read until we were deep in Fold Space Transit and had thought about every day since. She laughed in the way teenagers laugh about things they did when they were younger, a little embarrassed, a little proud. "Do you want to know why I wrote it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Because it was already true," she said. "Earth was already coming. I didn't know about the fleet or any of it. But they had hurt the children, so Earth was already on the way. It just took time for the signal to travel." She looked at me with the same steady eyes she had used at 10 years old when she had asked me whether aliens dreamed about us and then walked away to draw one before I could answer. "That's what we are," she said. "When it's about the children, there's no deliberating. It's already decided. The only thing left is the distance." I finished the record that night. All 140,000 words of it. Every name I had been given. Every hour I could reconstruct. Every conversation I had been part of and every one I had only observed. I titled it exactly what it was in the simplest possible terms because that was what it deserved. Then I closed the file. The field journal screen went dark. The weight of it passed out of my chest and into something that would outlast all of us, and I sat with the empty feeling where it had been, and it was not a bad feeling, and I did not try to fill it. The stylus was still in my hand. I set it down on the desk, gray composite, no markings, worn at the grip from 7 years of clicking. Outside the viewport, the stars held their positions, patient and indifferent and very, very far away, exactly as they had always been.